Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard Podcast. On today's episode, going to be taking a look at every team in the NBA, seeing where they're at as a franchise as we head into the trade deadline and what types of moves they need to make, whether it be minor or none or pretty significant. I'm going to split this into two parts for YouTube, so be sure to check out the other part if you haven't seen it yet. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. So that leads me into the next part of the podcast. This is a trade deadline themed podcast. I want to go through each team and see where they're at, what the state of their franchise is, and discuss what they should do moving forward and kind of some moves that they could make. I grouped them into 3.5 groups. 3 groups are pretty well defined, and then the half group that I mentioned is just one that teams that I didn't really know where to put them. They didn't really fall into the categories that I had set forward. So let's start out with the sellers, and if you look really close, you can look up and see that the vultures are circling all of these teams, looking to just pick off whatever assets they can. So mention the Blazers in the last part. It seems like this is the direction they're going in. It seems like they're going to be kind of selling things off here, either to retool around Dame or just completely tear down this franchise and start over. Obviously, Damian Lillard is one of the best assets we have in the league that would be available that you could trade for. Then you have CJ McCollum, who's still a really effective scorer. Yusef Nurkic, who I think in the right situation could be really effective. He's a dominant big man in the post. Really leaves a lot to be desired on defense, but offensively, he's got all the tools that you would want in a big guy. And then they've also got Larry Nance, kind of a hybrid small ball 5, stretch 4. He doesn't really shoot as well as you would like from a stretch 4, but it's good enough, and he's a good athlete, so he can play some pretty solid defense. Indiana, I've talked about them at length. If you want to check out more on Indiana, I did a whole video on their rebuild and what they should look to do moving forward. So that was a prior episode, and you can check that out. This is likely time to sell the farm. Just based on next year's draft, I think there's a lot of big man depth in that draft. So you don't want to just repeat the Sabonis and Turner pairing with a rookie, and then whichever big guy you decide to keep. They announced earlier in the year that they were looking to keep one. They didn't care which. I think they just need to deal both and just kind of start over. You've also got Torrey Craig, who's a decent guy for the wing, can give you some good defensive minutes. Jeremy Lamb could provide some scoring punch at the wing. Miles Turner, defensive anchor, 3-point specialist. Karis LeVert was already moved, so he's not there anymore. And then maybe TJ Warren, he might play this year. It's a little unclear. I couldn't find a lot on him. I think teams are going to stay away from making a deal for TJ, though, just because that stress fracture in the foot, that's something to be really concerned about. And I can't see teams pushing some assets forward to get a guy with some pretty serious injury concerns that may not even play this season. I saw something the other day. TJ Warren has missed more days of action with this injury than Oladipo did after rupturing his quad. So I would be concerned if I were trading for him. The Orlando Magic, obviously in a rebuilding stage, but they just don't have a lot to offer here. Maybe some team feels good about Gary Harris. He's just on a salary figure that it's going to be tough to get him moved for what he is as a player. Robin Lopez, I think, is a good big who could provide, some solid minutes in the playoffs. Nothing crazy. Like, he's not going to enter your starting lineup on a playoff team, but he could probably give you 10, 12 good minutes off the bench. And Terrence Ross, a good scoring option on the wing. That could be something for a team. The Pistons have Jeremy Grant, Kelly Olynyk. I can't believe I'm saying Kelly Olynyk, but Kelly Olynyk and Corey Joseph. It looks like they're looking to kind of move off of Jeremy Grant at the very least, and I don't think they're attached enough to Corey Joseph or Kelly Olynyk for them to be part of the long-term future there. The Thunder, Derek Favors, maybe Lou Dort. I've heard some Lou Dort stuff. I'm sure teams would be really interested in acquiring Dort, but I think the Thunder feel pretty strongly about him, so I doubt he gets moved. Derek Favors would definitely be a guy who could provide some big man depth for somebody. Also, Mike Muscala, another big guy. He shoots the 3 pretty well, so that could be something for someone. And then Kenrich Williams, another wing guy. Nothing really to get too excited about, but he's there and they would be willing to trade him. The Rockets have Eric Gordon, who I think is a really good asset for somebody. He is on a higher salary figure, so it's going to be hard to get him moved. Christian Wood, locker room issues aside, I would be pretty pissed off if I was him and I signed on to play with James Harden. And then overnight, I'm part of this rebuild thing and we're terrible. So I understand his frustration. So I think some of that is a little bit overblown. So he could be good for somebody. Daniel Tice, I can't imagine anybody signing up for his contract moving forward, but he's there. David Nwaba and John Wall, if anyone is interested. I threw the Kings in this category, but I also threw them in the later category of teams that I didn't really know what to do with. They should be sellers by their record and by just the general direction the franchise seems to be going in, but they stubbornly and delusionally aren't because they're so desperate to make a play-in game and just get completely curb stomped there. So, keep aiming high with your goals, Kings. Finishing 10th in your conference, that's really something to aspire to. The Pelicans are in the same boat as the Kings. I've talked about them enough. I did another whole episode on how they're repeating the same history with Anthony Davis as with Zion. So if you want to check out what a disaster they are, that's a previous episode that you can listen to. They're another team that thinks they're buyers, but they should really be sellers. I've heard some Brandon Ingram stuff tossed around, but I can't see him getting moved. I think we can safely throw the Spurs in there. They're kind of on the outside looking in. I wouldn't consider them buyers by any stretch. I can't see an organization like that pushing the chips in to get stomped out in the first round if they can even get out of the play-in round. So you've got maybe Derek White. I know Jakob Poeltl is there and Thad Young. Everyone else is trying to compete, whether that's complete delusion or not. It's an entirely different thing. But I think the play-in has really added this extra layer of competitiveness to the league because in years past, it felt like half the teams were just completely tanking. And a lot of teams, before the year even started, were just completely punting on their season. Now we've got just a handful of teams that are real sellers. And some of them, it's unclear whether they're selling or not. So that's really good for the competitiveness of the league. The next category I want to go over is the teams that I expect to either make no changes or just minor tweaks, like picking up buyout guys or just adding an 8th or 9th guy in the rotation, something like that. Let's start with the Suns, the team with the best record in the league. They could use another backup point guard and maybe a little bit more wing depth. Nothing earth-shattering, though. Crowder hasn't really shot the ball well this year, and just in general, throughout his career, his shot can be really hit or miss as far as the three-pointer goes. And then we've seen Cam Payne get really cold at times. So just insurance on those two guys, just get a little Cam Payne insurance, a little Jay Crowder insurance. That could help them out come playoff time. Everything else, they're fine. And in a normal situation where those guys are playing well, nobody that's better than them would be kind of my prescription for the Suns here. They played really well. They were the finals representative last year. They pretty much ran it back with the same team. No need to completely shake things up here. The Warriors are another team that I think they just need to focus on getting healthy and working everyone in. If they want to make a big move, big splash, there's no harm in waiting till the offseason for them so they have time to make that decision. But I think it's important for them to just kind of see what they have this year, see what version of Klay Thompson they're going to get back. The Memphis Grizzlies, another team that could make a big splash, but their chemistry is so good this year. The guys really enjoy playing together. And if you've watched any of their games, all of those guys are trash talking the other team, and it's really refreshing to see. So probably best to just not rock the boat here. Once you get into the playoffs and you have a nice little playoff run under your belt, it will be easier to see where your weaknesses are. And that would be in the offseason would be the time to maybe cash in some of that depth and some of those younger guys for proven stars. The Nuggets, just get healthy. This was a lost year to begin with Murray and Porter out. So just get healthy for them. The Heat are very similar to the Warriors. They've had a lot of injuries, so just get healthy and work everyone in. Depth in this year's league is going to go farther than we've ever seen it go. So, and then if there is anything I could say for them, maybe a little bit more punch in the crunch time scoring category. Sometimes our half court offense can just stall out and it looks ugly. It looks like it's really hard for us to get baskets down the stretch of games. It's basically Jimmy or bust a lot of times. So it'd be nice to get like another guy who can kind of do that. But the good news is we have one of those on our roster. He just hasn't played yet. We'll see what version of Victor Oladipo we get back, and that could be the solution there. The Bucks, it's hard to imagine the defending champs doing anything too crazy. They could use some center help, though, in the case that Brook Lopez can't come back, and he might not be able to. Or you can go in a different direction and go with the stretch four, just get some help there if you want to commit to Giannis playing the five for larger stretches. But for them, if they get Brook Lopez back, I think this roster is fine. If they're not going to get him back, I think they do need to add a little bit of big man help. The Nets, I know things have been wild for them with as far as rumors go with James Harden. I can't imagine them pulling the plug on this big three before they've even had a chance to give it a run in the playoffs. I just can't see a case for that. It sounds like they're trending towards Kyrie becoming more available as this season goes on. So it's doubtful he gets dealt. Maybe you do a Harden for Simmons trade, but I just don't see a case for that. I think you can wait till the offseason for that at the very least. Harden has an option that I'm sure he's going to accept. It's like $47 million. Can't see him turning that down. So that would be the time to maybe address a James Harden trade. I can't see them doing anything too earth-shattering here, at least as far as the regular season goes. Let's move on to the next category here. These are teams that are one or two fairly significant moves away from being real contenders or hitting the next step in their team's development. I'm going to start out with the Chicago Bulls. They were borderline for this placement or the minor tweaks category. So I'll just get them out of the way here really quick. They have been just completely decimated by injuries as of late. But even with everyone back, they're going to need some extra help at the big guy, and they're going to need some extra wing depth. Nothing earth-shattering here, but if they could somehow get into Jeremy Grant and that sweepstakes, he would fit both of those needs for them. I would be hesitant to add Grant, though, specifically for them, because he has said that he wants to be the man wherever he goes. He wants to be able to create offense for himself and be a key focal point of the offense wherever he goes, wherever the Pistons trade him. I thought that was crazy that he said that. He's not really the type of player, at least as far as his skills go, to be making demands like that, but whatever. I wish I had his confidence. So I would worry about where his head is at as far as sacrificing the type of assets it would take to get him for a title run. But I think adding a Vucevic insurance piece, especially come playoff time where he's going to be having to go up against Embiid and Giannis for stretches, I just think having somebody who can come in, play some spot defense would really help them. And then just a little bit of extra wing depth there, nothing that's going to completely shake up their rotation, but just some help there would really go a long way. The Cavs are the next team. I talked about them in the midseason surprises podcast, so I'm just going to try to keep it as brief as possible. If you want to hear more about them, listen to that pod. Really all they needed to hit the next level was a shot creator. They're going to get that in Karis LeVert. They could also use somebody to provide a little bit more playmaking, but mainly the shot making piece. And if you got a little bit of playmaking in with that addition, all the better. Karis LeVert is going to at least address the shot making part of it, which was the biggest thing they were missing. I had notes about them reuniting with Jordan Clarkson on the Jazz, but and how that was going to be an okay option. But no need to mention that the salary piece that they would have needed to get either that or Eric Gordon done went out the door with Ricky Rubio. So good on them. Karis LeVert was top of my list for them, for guys that they should be looking to go after. So great job by them to go out and get him. And for a relatively cheap price, it didn't really cost them anything. You know, it's going to be a late first round pick this year, a couple of seconds in the future. Nothing too earth shattering there. Karis LeVert is in a huge financial commitment. He's only under contract through next season. So if things just completely go the disaster route with him and he completely disrupts their chemistry, they can always let him walk out the door or trade him as an expiring contract in the offseason. I also think Dennis Schroeder on the Celtics could be a good option for them. Maybe you could send Rajon Rondo and that McGee trade exception with a second round pick, and that might get you Schroeder. I wouldn't do much more than that to get Schroeder, but that would just give them a little bit more scoring punch, and I think that could go a long way for them. At times during, at least when I've watched them, Down the stretch of games, they have a lot of trouble, a lot like I mentioned with the Heat. They just have trouble getting baskets down the stretch of games, and LeVert will go a long way to address that. Schroeder could help even further if they wanted to add, if LeVert is having an off night, you could close the game with Schroeder and Garland as your backcourt. Mentioned Eric Gordon. They can't really get him, but I do want to mention Eric Gordon and kind of go into why he might be kind of an undervalued asset right now, or underrated, a guy that can really help out a team, and not really being discussed. Currently, Eric Gordon, it's scoring 0.96 points per possession on his ISO opportunities. That's the exact same as Jaylen Brown and Trae Young. He's ahead of Levine, Middleton, Luka, and Beal for as far as points per possession. Obviously, he's got a smaller sample size than those guys, but he's still got a decent volume as far as ISO opportunities go. It's along the lines of somebody like Malcolm Brogdon, somewhat similar to his ISO opportunities. And he's doing this on a really crappy team in Houston. So why couldn't he do that in spots for somebody else like Utah or somebody? Cleveland would have been a good option for him. He's also only 33 years old, as crazy as that seems. It feels like he's been in the league for 20 years. Holds up defensively. He's not a lockdown guy, but he's not really killing you on that end. And having watched a handful of Houston games this year, offensively, he still got it. As much as any 33-year-old with injury issues could. He's still a knockdown shooter, and he's got some teeth to his shot creation still. He can still get to the basket, get around guys here and there. So I think he's a real asset for somebody. The Hornets I talked about a little bit this year. Their really only need is to just upgrade at center. They're an obvious landing spot for somebody like Miles Turner, Yusef Nurkic, Domantas Sabonis. I think Sabonis is the least good fit for that. Just for what they'd have to give up, I think they would have to give up less to get Nurkic, and that would be a move if you want to lean more offensive. Turner is really the spot that they could upgrade this team at. They're currently 25th in defensive rating, so they need help defensively, and Turner's shot blocking could really provide something, at least to stop the bleeding. I don't think they'd become an elite defensive team on the back of just adding Miles Turner, but I think you would see that defensive rating get more to the mid tier of teams rather than the bottom of the league. He can only do so much on that end, kind of like Rudy Gobert, just a really poor man's version of that. And it could be a fun target for LaMelo. He's a pretty athletic guy. He's a good 3-point shooter, so he's still spacing the floor for you. I think that would be a really great pickup for them. At the end of the day, though, they're still just a super young team. And like the Grizzlies, just to a much less degree of success, they might just want to get to the playoffs and see where the holes are at in this boat in terms of the leaks, where the holes are. If you like put a boat in the water, pull it out, and see where the water is leaking, that could be kind of the approach that they should take. And I think they should kind of take that approach, unless getting Miles Turner or somebody like that isn't going to cost them too much as far as assets go. The next team, the Hawks, I'm really unsure if I can point to any better addition by subtraction deal than what the Hawks just made with Reddish. They completely turned it around after he got out the door. They're 7-3 in their last 10, and that includes a win against the Suns. They're back in the play-in. Capella can't be moved until after the deadline, so no need to do anything at center with Capella and Okongwu and Collins as your small ball five. Even what's his name, Danilo Gallinari, even he can give you some small ball five in spots, and if you're in a pinch. I've heard Jeremy Grant tossed around again for the Hawks. And skill set wise, if he replaced the Gallo minutes as far as the small ball five and just kind of was inserted there, his defensive versatility and his scoring chops would really help the team out. But if you go past just the surface level there, he said he wants to be the man, so it'd be very similar to the Cam Reddish fit all over again, where a guy who's kind of shooting more than you would like him to, especially on an Atlanta team where you've got no shortage of offensive threats. I just don't think that makes sense for them. Swapping some of the depth for like some real wing upgrades is really the only thing that they need to do, unless they get really crazy and start looking for a John Collins trade just because he's sort of unhappy. Maybe you could do Herter and Herter and Gallinari for Harrison Barnes. I don't know if I'm wanting to give up Herter for Barnes, but That could be something. Maybe you could just do Gallo for Barnes with picks going to Sacramento. But if Sacramento is insistent that they're a buyer this trade deadline, they're not going to take Gallinari back for Harrison Barnes. This might just be the team moving forward, at least for this run, unless they make some trade out of left field that none of us saw coming, some big splash type move, which could make some sense for them because they've got a lot of depth. We saw that this team is really close in last year's playoffs, and I mentioned the Grizzlies and Cavs kind of waiting to see what they have in the offseason. That's really what this team can do as well, and they kind of did that with last offseason. So really the big splash move is all they have left. We don't really see a lot of those come trade deadline time. Typically, that's typically an off-season move. That way you have time to work the guy that you just acquired in. The Utah Jazz, they're really in the danger zone here. They just lost Joe Ingles, a guy who was important to them, and maybe even more significantly, he was the guy they were really dangling out there as far as a trade piece. Also, there's been rumors that Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert are not getting along very well, and I get it from both of their perspectives. It makes a lot of sense. For Mitchell, Gobert would be really frustrating to play with. He just doesn't give you much offensively, or at least as much as you would expect from a guy making the amount of money he does and as big as he is. He doesn't punish switches on guards on the offensive side of the ball. I remember during the playoffs, they would throw Patrick Beverley on him at times, and Gobert really didn't do anything with that. That would be really frustrating. For Gobert, this team's defense and how good they are defensively is just entirely on his shoulders. They've switched to 14th in the league in defensive rating, with him being out with some injuries here as of late. He's an all-time defensive center. Maybe not the best of all time, but he's going to be remembered historically as one of the best defensive centers we've ever seen in the league. And Mitchell could be a really good defender, but his effort isn't always there. And the perimeter defense at times for Utah, it looks so bad that it looks more like a turnstile than like an effective perimeter defense. And that just leaves Gobert to clean up after everyone. So I understand his frustrations as well. But there's an even larger problem here that we mentioned during the Christmas Day episode. This team is built almost identically to the Phoenix Suns, with scoring guards who do some playmaking, the versatile wings, and then the monster guy in the middle. It's almost exactly like the Suns when you think about Paul and Booker versus Conley and Mitchell, and then the slew of wings, and you've got Gobert and Ayton as the defensive anchor and the anchor of the offense. Like we said, though, during that episode, if you group those three players together, the guards, the wings, and the center, the man in the middle, you're taking the Suns guards over the Jazz without question. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and we'll add Cam Payne in there, are better than Clarkson, Mitchell, and Conley. They just are. Individually, you can make whatever argument you want, but as a group, the Suns have an advantage there. Same with the wings. The wings, you would rather have, now that Ingles is out, especially, you've got Bogdanovich and Royce O'Neal, and I guess Rudy Gay, will throw him in there, versus Cam Johnson, Jay Crowder, and Mikal Bridges. That's not particularly close. The bigs, the debate between the two groups of big guys is really the only debate we have. Personally, I'm going to take Ayton just because he's good enough on defense. He's not nearly as good as Gobert, but he knows his role offensively, more importantly, Ayton, and he busts his ass on both ends. You can't switch the pick and roll with the Suns because Ayton is just going to kill you all game. Gobert doesn't do that. Outside of just the Gobert versus Ayton thing, you would rather have JaVale McGee and Jalen Smith or Jay Crowder as a small ball five. That's much better than what the Jazz have to offer with Whiteside or Eric Paschall or Rudy Gay as a small ball five. Whiteside doesn't give you a lot defensively, at least on the ball. He's a good help side defender, but it's kind of like Gobert at times offensively, where you're just like, gosh, would you just dunk the ball? It shouldn't be that hard. And then defensively, from his time in Miami, I know he's kind of overrated on that end, at least with respect to the on-ball stuff. He can kind of get torched there. A good help side defender, but I would rather have McGee and some combination of Jalen Smith and Crowder specifically as the small ball five than I would Whiteside with a sprinkling of Pascal or Rudy Gay as a small ball five. So if the road is going through Phoenix here, like it appears to be, as presently constructed, the Jazz just can't beat them. At every positional category we basically have in today's league, the Suns have an advantage. And even the center spot, which you could maybe lean towards the Jazz, I think you could make just as good of a case for the Suns having an advantage there. Offensively, I think they have enough. When you have two of either Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, and Mike Conley, it's good enough. And in a playoff series, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't have two of them on the court at the same time. Just Quinn Snyder is a good coach. He's going to get the rotation figured out so that you're never with just one on the court or none on the court. Really, for them, it comes down to upgrading the perimeter defense and just giving themselves a little bit more flexibility to play small ball. For the Suns series specifically, Crowder is okay as a small ball five, but it's not great. I think the Jazz could lean into that. Also, the ceiling of what you could be defensively is greater than any other team in the league because you have Rudy Gobert. They should really go all in to get Jeremy Grant. This is my prime team for Jeremy Grant. If you trade Ingles expiring, that's going to save the Pistons money. You can throw in Jared Butler, a young rookie prospect that maybe the Pistons could be enticed by, and then a first-round pick. That might get it done. I've mentioned Jeremy Grant several times. He wants to be the man. I think he's still going to be allowed to cook here. I think he's still going to, be able to get his offense within, a reasonable amount, the way he's happy, and also he's not just completely disrupting the flow of your offense here in Utah. And he's just going to add defensive versatility here. He can guard to the center, small ball five wise, and he can go up to guarding the three. So that would really help. And when Rudy Gobert isn't on the floor, they could go Jeremy Grant as the small ball five and try to punish the Suns for running McGee. And if the Suns want to go small to match up with Jeremy Grant, Crowder's not as good of a small ball five as Jeremy Grant could be. Clarkson is the other movable guy. I think they can live without his volume shot creating now. It's been inefficient at times, and this has just not been good enough of a year. And if they were able to get Jeremy Grant, he can fill in that scoring punch role. Clarkson's just going to be a tough sell. Even though he's on an affordable contract, it's just not a high volume shooting, small defensive liability guard. It's just not on the wish list of many teams. I mentioned Cleveland, but now that they have Karis LeVert, really not going to get you there with him. You can always go for Eric Gordon too. And I mentioned him as being a real asset. That would take you Bogdanovich to do that. And you could do that in the Grant deal, or you could do that with the Houston Eric Gordon deal. If you did Boyan and Azubuike as a young prospect, or maybe Jared Butler, you could maybe get Nwaba and Eric Gordon. Maybe Houston does Azubuike and a second round pick for Nwaba. Nwaba could really help them out, at least as far as perimeter defense. Eric Gordon, I think, would be a real add for them, and I think that could really help them out. They're really close to being a real contender for the title this year. They just need that last push over the edge to kind of get them into the title, into being a real competitor for the title. Right now, they're kind of a dark horse, and that's how we've kind of seen them in years past. Even last year, I don't think anybody really took them that seriously as a title contender. But they've just, with their limitations of their roster being constructed so similarly to the Suns, they're going to need to get something that's going to set them apart from the Suns when they inevitably meet them in the playoffs. Next team I want to talk about is the Timberwolves. They're miles away from competing for an NBA title, but thank God they're finally moving in the right direction. This team is finally moving in a positive direction. So for the most part, for them, stay the course. It's see what you have. A lot like the other young teams I've mentioned. It's important for them to find out whether the Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards pair is going to work long term. I think it does. I at least don't see why it wouldn't work offensively. You've got a score first guard and a stretch the floor type big. I just can't see any reason why that wouldn't work. So what do they need this year? I think they really just need a backup point guard. The offense really struggles without D'Angelo Russell to run the point and kind of get everyone into their stuff. As crazy as that sounds, their point guard situation is so dire outside of D'Angelo Russell that when he's not on the floor, it can kind of completely fall apart. Anthony Edwards just isn't there and might never be there playmaking wise. He's really just geared towards scoring. And I think they kind of just need to lean into that. So if they just get a solid backup point guard, that could go a long way for them. Outside of that, they really need somebody who can cover for Towns as a defensive anchor. He's not going to be that. And if they could find a long-term fit there, great, or just some big man that they can play alongside Towns that doesn't just completely stall out your offense or make you too slow on defense. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt becomes that at some point, but I think in order for that to work long-term, you're going to need him to develop a little bit more offensively. And that could be the way they go. But it's great to see them finally moving in the right direction here. It feels like it's been years since